This is week 166 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. Finally, after months of delay, the hotly debated resource agreement between Ukraine and the United States was signed late on Wednesday. The minerals deal has been cited by the US as a key step on the road towards negotiating peace between Ukraine and Russia, with promises that future investments in Ukraine will both deter further Russian aggression and help Ukraine rebuild itself after years of brutal invasion. President Volodymyr Zelensky says that this is the first of multiple positive results to come from his 15-minute chat with US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral last weekend. The deal signifies the start of a partnership between America and Ukraine, in which both countries will invest in Ukraine's natural resources via a joint fund, towards which Ukraine will pay 50% of the revenue from any new licenses to extract resources within the country's territory. The US will dually provide financial and other material support to Ukraine to aid in its reconstruction and growth. In layman's terms, this means that the US has first dibs on Ukraine's natural resources, like oil, gas, and other minerals, and in return, Ukraine will be strengthened financially and security-wise. At least, that's the idea. Although the final version of the deal didn't include the security guarantees that Ukraine has fought for, it does have some improvements over previous versions. The final deal stipulates that Kyiv won't need to pay back military aid already received from the US, and future aid can be considered contributions to the joint fund on the US's part. Within the deal, new contributions of aid aren't limited to financial investments. According to Ukraine's economy minister, Yulia Sviridenko, it could also include material like air defense systems that would strengthen Ukraine's defensive position against Russian attacks. The deal doesn't interfere with Ukraine's path to EU membership and does not give the US control over Ukrainian territory or infrastructure, something that was a deep concern for Ukraine. Experts told the Kyiv Independent that this iteration of the deal is far more palatable for Ukraine than previous versions, and that overall, its signing can be considered a win when it comes to Ukraine's dealings with Trump, as well as a blow to Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But it's perhaps more prudent to view this as a symbolic political win, rather than a hard business agreement. As we've talked about before on this show, it's all well and good to say that the stage is set for new investments in Ukraine, but quite another thing to get things set up and running on the ground. Without security guarantees, of the kind that the US continues to withhold, even a ceasefire won't be enough to reassure investors that they're making a sound decision by setting up shop in Ukraine, a country that Russia makes no secret that it ultimately wants to occupy in entirety. Just saying that the door is open for future investments doesn't make those investments materialize, putting everyone in a limbo state of needing more assurances before proceeding, but not really being able to proceed without assurances. On Wednesday, both Ukraine and America checked a big item off their to-do list, but the US administration kept the headlines coming when on Thursday, Trump dismissed his national security advisor Mike Waltz. Waltz has faced criticism in recent months for the leaked signal chat in which he and other top officials discussed highly classified plans, namely the bombing of Yemen, in a group chat that mistakenly included a journalist from The Atlantic, who outed the administration for its failure to adhere to even the most basic of protocols when discussing matters of national security. During his brief tenure, Waltz has been a figure in the US-led peace process between Russia and Ukraine, but not as central a player as we'd anticipated he'd be when he was appointed to the role. He's been critical of President Zelensky and his hesitancy to sign the minerals deal, but for the most part, Waltz has echoed the administration's talking points without differentiating himself much in the process. A source at the National Security Council told CBS that the timing of Waltz's dismissal, more than a month after the leaked group chat incident, may be an attempt on Trump's part to save face. It doesn't look so much like an impulsive firing based on public pressure, but rather a calculated decision as part of a wider reshuffle. There are rumors that TV host turned Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth might also be on the chopping block for his role in the leak and other similar violations of national security protocol, but as of now, he remains. I won't go into huge detail about the speculations surrounding Waltz's potential replacement, but one of the top contenders seems to be Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Witkoff has grown increasingly cozy with Vladimir Putin over his 4 visits to Russia this year, parroting Russian propaganda afterwards and earning a bad reputation for his ignorance about Ukraine and its defense from Moscow. If Witkoff is elevated to the role, it's hard to see how that would bode well for Ukraine. At the Kyiv Independent, reader contributions are our main source of revenue. Shows like Ukraine This Week are only made possible by viewers like you. If you'd like to get more involved in the Kyiv Independent community, we have several membership tiers that give you access to our Discord community, exclusive content, discounts on our merch, and more. We have a really active group of readers who have built a relationship with our newsroom and with each other, and we'd love to have you along. There will be a link to our membership page in the description below. For this segment, I'll start with the good. Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky said this week that in April, Ukraine destroyed 83,000 Russian targets using drones, up 8% compared to March. In the same time span, Ukraine retook a reported 115 positions from Russian forces. There was also the satisfying revelation by Vladimir Putin himself on Wednesday that, contrary to Russia's reports that it had fully pushed Ukrainian forces out from the entirety of Kursk Oblast, Ukrainian forces do indeed remain present in the Russian region. At the same time, Ukraine's general staff is noting intensified Russian assaults in various sectors as the spring offensive continues to build steam. Among the most concerning of these is occurring south of Pokrovsk in western Donetsk Oblast. The area lies close to the border with the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, which is notably not occupied by Russia in any part, and Russian troops haven't entered it thus far in the invasion. Given the concerning rhetoric surrounding the US recognizing both fully and partially occupied territory as de facto belonging to Russia in peace negotiations, you can see why the prospect of Russia gaining even a tiny foothold in a 6th region of Ukraine is horrifying. Families have been evacuated from 4 villages in eastern Dnipropetrovsk Oblast for the first time, as fighting draws closer. Also this week, Putin announced that he's finally ready for an unconditional ceasefire, but only for 3 days. Putin wants Russian troops to stop fighting for a 3-day break that coincides with Victory Day, the May 9th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, when Moscow hosts an annual extravaganza of military parades, patriotic performances, and vitriolic speeches about Russia's imperial destiny. If you've ever seen photos of Russian kids in full military outfits marching in formation, it's probably from a previous Victory Day. These parades have been built up over the decades by Putin, and the ideology behind it has been twisted to fit his rhetoric. Rather than celebrating peace in Europe and a final defeat of fascism by the Allies, Putin's Victory Day tends to involve soul worship of the Russian state and justifications for its invasion of other countries. This will also be the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and Putin hopes to draw high-profile leaders as guests. Although Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has notably declined, the event will reportedly be attended by the leaders of at least 19 countries, including China, Serbia, Slovakia, Venezuela, Brazil, and more. The reaction to the proposed 3-day truce, in Ukraine, in Europe, and beyond, was incredulous. Russia has only amped up its attacks on Ukrainian cities as it declines Ukraine's plea for an unconditional ceasefire, making the idea of a truce just for the sake of a Russian military holiday a bit laughable. I'll also add here that holidays in Ukraine are a particularly anxious time for civilians, because that's often when Russia hits hardest. Just take the recent Palm Sunday attack on Sumy as an example of Russia's respect for special days on the calendar. As European Commission spokesperson Anita Hipper put it, Russia could stop the killing and the bombing at any time, so there's absolutely no need to wait until the 8th of May. There could have been a full ceasefire already, and could be one at any time, but Russia refused to comply with even a partial ceasefire on energy infrastructure. As such, there's nothing to suggest that they'd honor a temporary full truce even if Ukraine agreed, and no reason that Moscow residents deserve to have a parade without the fear imposed upon Ukraine every minute of every day. Speaking of preventing aerial attacks, this week my colleague Colin spent a night with a volunteer mobile air defense unit that operates in Irpin, a city just outside of Kyiv, to learn more about how Ukraine is adapting to the continued threat from Russia.
We are out here northwest of Kyiv. It is a beautiful night. Stars are out, but we are not stargazing. We are shahed gazing. Russia has advanced its primary drones, the Shaheds, significantly in the past couple of years, but particularly over recent months, using new tactics, new engineering. However, the teams like this one, the mobile groups that defend Ukraine's skies, they have also advanced significantly in recent months.
В середньому, щоб ви розуміли, на низьких висотах у нас десь секунд 5-6 напрацювання. Тобто це нам потрібно їх виявити, зафіксувати і знищити. Зараз дуже помітно, раніше прокладували там маршрут шахеду, і він так по маршруту собі йшов. Дуже просто було їх там знищувати. На даний час же вони реагують на світло, тобто якщо вмикаємо фонарі, вони починають маневрувати. Також вони зараз, там, деякі з них управляємі, тобто їми керують. І також в онлайн, я так розумію, вони знімають наші позиції, тобто бачать нас і фіксують нас. В общому наша група десь знищила там 16 штук, 17.
As ceasefire negotiations proceed, attacks on Ukraine continue every night. As we are standing out here, rockets have been falling over Sumy, Chernihiv, Cherkasy. Mobile groups like these folks are hoping that they will succeed in keeping Ukraine's skies safe.
There have been new, disturbing developments in the case of Viktoriia Roschyna, a 27-year-old Ukrainian journalist who died in Russian captivity in 2024 after being captured the year prior while reporting from occupied territory. Her case is shocking and brutal, and highlights the systemic torture and other inhumane treatment of captive Ukrainians in Russian facilities. Roschyna, a career journalist and native of Zaporizhia, disappeared in August of 2023 while reporting from southern Ukraine. She had previously undertaken multiple reporting trips into occupied territories, focusing on exposing clandestine detention practices and human rights abuses. After her disappearance, it took 9 months for Russian authorities to even acknowledge her detention. She was held without legal representation or formal charges, spending her final months in the Taganrog prison in southern Russia, known for its systemic torture of prisoners. Witnesses have attested to seeing Roschyna in the prison and to observing her being tortured. Her family was notified that she was dead in October of 2024, over a month after her official date of death. Roschyna's body wasn't returned to Ukraine until February of this year, when it was brought back during a prisoner exchange. Her remains were mislabeled and so unrecognizable that they had to be identified by DNA testing. Forensic analysis revealed extensive signs of torture, including abrasions, a broken rib, and burns on her feet, commonly caused by electric shocks. Her head was shaved. The hyoid bone in her neck was broken, which can be a side effect of strangulation. Notably, organs such as her brain, eyes, and part of her larynx were missing from her remains, which tends to happen when the people responsible for a death want to hide the evidence. If Roschyna was murdered by asphyxiation or other methods that would appear in a full autopsy, it would provide direct evidence of Russia's war crimes. The absence of her organs is itself quite damning. Ukraine's foreign ministry has called for a global response to Roschyna's death, urging allies to address systemic human rights violations in occupied territories. Torture by Russian captors is reported among Ukrainian civilians and former military personnel alike. Approximately 16,000 Ukrainian civilians remain in Russian captivity, according to Ukrainian officials. Among them, at least 30 are believed to be journalists. Ukrainians are held in 180 facilities across Russia and occupied territories, where they're denied humanitarian aid and lawyers. Yesterday was World Press Freedom Day, which coincides with the anniversary of the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall. Roschyna's death so poignantly underscores why this day matters, because everyone deserves to live in a world where the truth prevails and those who tell it are protected. There was a story in the past few weeks so bizarre that we could not ignore it. Of the small number of Americans who've made headlines for taking Russia's side in its invasion of Ukraine, and I'm looking at you, Steven Seagal, few have been as unexpected as 21-year-old Michael Gloss, the son of a CIA deputy director and an Iraq war veteran, who is confirmed to have been killed fighting alongside Russian forces in spring of last year, although the circumstances of his death were only recently made known by an investigation from the exiled Russian outlet Important Stories. Gloss, a Virginia native, is documented on social media prior to his death, posting Soviet war propaganda and selfies taken on Moscow's Red Square, alongside his commentary about the West misunderstanding Russia and what he called the Ukraine proxy war. He signed a contract with the Russian military in September of 2023, and sources say that he was deployed to eastern Ukraine in an assault unit several months later, with his death officially recorded as April 4th, 2024, somewhere between 5 and 6 months after his enlistment. The investigation that broke the story of his enlistment and subsequent death in the Russian military, in contradiction to the obituary published last year by his family, which just said that he died while traveling abroad, claims that he is one of more than 1,500 foreigners to go through the Russian recruitment process during the invasion of Ukraine. His exact path from high school athlete to social justice advocate to hippie traveler to mercenary isn't entirely known, but evidence points to a troubled young man seeking some kind of answer and finding it in the ephemeral and ever-adaptable realm of Russian propaganda. Despite the immediate conspiracy that, like his parents, he too had ties to the American government, all testimony and evidence suggests that Gloss joined the Russian military of his own will, likely in direct opposition to his parents' wishes, and his death was undifferentiated from that of the other foreigners Russia uses to bolster its infantry numbers. Given who Gloss's parents are, his death is first and foremost a colossal embarrassment for Russia. There are two options here. Either the Russian officials who communicated with Gloss and processed his enlistment were unaware of his familial connections to the CIA, meaning that they didn't even do the most basic of background checks. If that's not the case, it means they knowingly sent a valuable negotiating chip into the meat grinder, wasting any value that Gloss could have provided as an asset or a prisoner to be swapped. The reporter who broke the story of Gloss's death said in a Reddit AMA session this week that he thinks Gloss truly believed the propaganda he was fed about Russia's invasion on social media, and felt himself to be on a righteous crusade when he traveled to Russia and joined the military. Gloss is a cautionary tale. He was influenced by Russian propaganda. He was killed by Russian reality. The qualities that drove him to his death aren't unique. Wanting to know the truth, to see the world, to be part of a movement and a community, to self-actualize through decisions. We all want these things, and especially at 20 years old, we all think that we're uniquely positioned to achieve them. It's why we need to be hyper-vigilant of the ways in which bad faith actors, like Russia, find their way to people who are vulnerable, and to teach the kind of media literacy that helps young people to separate an appealing lie from a more complicated truth. It's notable that countries like Finland and Estonia that directly border Russia have already introduced this kind of media training in their schools to help young people develop an eye for discerning fake information from truth, especially online. Years of experience with their neighbor have clearly shown them that they have no time to waste in the information war. For our reader question this week, I'm going to be handing it back to Colin. So Colin, the question that we have, this is from Reddit. What happened to the Wagner PMC after the coup attempt? Are they still active in Ukraine? I feel like they used to be reported on so much before the coup, and then after, not a trace. What do you think?
Part of it goes back to the history of Wagner and founder Yevgeny Prigozhin. The primary function of Wagner was not necessarily to be the best fighting force. The primary function was to be a plausibly deniable force to do Putin's will outside of, what they were supposed to be doing. That required Prigozhin to kind of keep his mouth shut, which he was good at for a very long time, but in the months leading up to his untimely demise, presumable assassination, he stepped out from behind the curtain quite a lot. But even before he was actually killed, Wagner's operations in Ukraine had been getting wrapped up. They had taken units from Wagner and put them under the Russian Ministry of Defense. He was still operational inside of most sub-Saharan Africa primarily. So Prigozhin, he actually came back to Moscow from Mali, where he was in semi-exile. After he was assassinated, Wagner's autonomy was effectively gone. Other private military corporations have emerged after that. I think the most famous is probably Redoubt, which means it's unlikely to be the most important because, again, their function is primarily secrecy. But it's a pretty sure thing that nobody else is going to get that kind of autonomy again, because once again, they are extensions of the Russian Ministry of Defense at this point.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, as much as anyone can enjoy a compilation of disturbing news, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated.